you, Bishop Jung, for your words of wisdom and guidance for us today. We are welcoming today, and well, before I do this, I want to say that this is the third of our times where we have been working on our diversity, equity, inclusion work, our beloved community work, the third Monday, and we've had many different trainings. And if you find this interesting, please keep a watch for the trainings that our Diversity Council is planning and preparing for us, because from what I have seen, they look like they're going to be great. And I will enjoy watching them from afar as others plan them now. We welcome today Laura Kigueva as the Director of Grassroots Organizing at the General Board of Church and Society. So, it just seems fascinating to me that we have in our global organization people who are hired and paid to study and learn and teach about organizing ourselves and being involved in the grassroots, being involved in our communities. And we have the gift of being able, through our apportionments, which is a minor part of what we have and use of the offerings we get in our church. But through our apportionments connected together, we get to have the gift of these kinds of trainers and this kind of advocacy work on our behalf. Thank you, Laura, for your part of that. She builds, strengthens, and equips United Methodists to transform the systems and systemic conditions of injustice in both the church, community, and world through faith-based community organizing. When I talked with Laura, I said, what we want is your expertise on community organizing, and we want you to help us apply that knowledge and that understanding to how we live that out in our churches to make a difference in our communities, to help our churches become more alive and vital, and to strengthen our work in justice and mission. And so that's what she's going to be working with today. You saw her bio, you can see her bio on our website. I won't read all of that to you, but I welcome you, Laura. I can see you here on this screen. I can see you can see her there too. I welcome you and give ourselves over to your guidance. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sue. Thank you, Bishop Jung, for your words. I'm very grateful for the reminder of how we can be the tapestry of God's creation through relocation, redistribution, and reconciliation. And I hope that we can touch on that today. I'm so sorry I'm not able to be with you all in person. We are still living through a global pandemic. And when I was sick, I was like, I need to take care of my body. So I'm on the mend. My body feels good, but my voice is slowly returning. So please be patient with me. Thankfully, with organizing presentations, it's more about you than the presenter. So we will be engaged in a lot of conversation. And so I also just want to say again, thank you to Sue, to Lisa, Bishop Jung, and all of your incredible team to make this happen. Lisa, I just have one question. It would be great to see the audience. Right now, I'm just staring at the mic, and so I'd love to be able to see at least a couple of you all.
I'm on my way.
Okay, great. So as Lisa makes her way, I just want to kind of give you all an overview. So during today's presentation, I do hope to introduce you to the foundations of organizing and see where that connects with your faith values. There you all are, yay. And commitments as you serve throughout the Wisconsin Annual Conference, your communities, and world. So we're gonna start, we already did some welcome and we're gonna move into a time of acknowledgements. You all will have some introductions. This will be where you are talking. The first session will be building off of some theological foundations. We'll move into how that informs our stories for change. And then the final session will be about relationship building. How do those stories lead us to build relationships around our assets, our abundance that's already present with us and within our communities? I hope we'll have some time for question and answer, and then we will close. Does that sound good? If I can just get a thumbs up so y'all know. Yay, okay, y'all are ready. This is wonderful. So I invite us just to pause to consider God's tapestry that is in this room, but also the tapestry that is holding us right now. Let us take a moment to honor the purposeful relationships, the purposeful tapestry of God that brought us here together. May we acknowledge the land created by God that holds us. Give thanks for the indigenous knowledge that came before us and that holds us in this very moment. I acknowledge that where I am, I'm on the unceded land that was not handed over of the Piscataway and Nacotchtank people. I give thanks for their presence, for their leadership. I give thanks for the enslaved and free Black lives, whose presence, leadership, and stewardship of this land, of the Piscataway and Nacotchtank people, committed to a future that is now my present, where I'm more free. I give thanks for Indigenous, Black, Brown, Asian, all communities of color, this beautiful tapestry of God that have labored, strategized for my freedom, for our collective liberation. So right now, I invite you to take a moment to acknowledge where you are, the land that holds you, the Indigenous freedom fighters that have labored with you and for you to be more free. And I'll invite, if there's a voice in the room that knows of the Indigenous presence where you are in Green Bay, Wisconsin, if you could come to the mic and speak their names right now. Or if there's an Indigenous presence that is in the room, I'm sorry, I cannot see you.
This is Sue.
Thank you.
And we began our annual conference with the Acknowledge of the Lands. These First Nation peoples that have come before us, and many of them who are still with us: Chippewa, Superior Chippewa, Potawatomi, Menominee, Ho-Chunk, Oneida, Stockbridge, Munsee, Mohican, Ojibwe, Dakota, Anishinaabe, Winnebago, Sioux, and Ottawa. We give thanks for these people who cared for our land and for the space in which we live.
Along with Indigenous presence, I also invite you to call in any leaders that inform why you're here in this moment. Who's equipped you? Who is the tapestry that informs your why in this moment?
In my life, I raise up Chief Evergreen Tree, Chief Winnie Sheck.
Thank you.
I raise up all the ancestors my ancestors who were enslaved, who couldn't see the day that they would be free, but knew that one day their descendants would be free.
Thank you. Well, amen. May we continue to acknowledge in all the ways that we need, knowing that this work of change, this commitment to change, first begins with us acknowledging the truth of where we are, the people who've laid the foundations of freedom and liberation. We do not do this acknowledgement to perform, but really to recognize who walks along with us and who allows us to be the future, the ancestors that our future will need. So thank you all. And I invite you to continue to reflect on who we need to acknowledge in this room as we engage in this conversation together. So we've taken the time to acknowledge those who came before us. Now is the time to acknowledge those in the room. So I know there's a lot of you, so I just want you to turn around to your neighbor. You're going to get really familiar with your neighbor. Activist and author Adrienne Maree Brown calls folks woes, folks who you're working on excellence with. So I'm going to invite you to turn to your neighbor and say, "What's up, my woe?" The person who's you're working on excellence with. And in that, I want you to just introduce yourself with your name, a pronoun, the church, if you're clergy or laity, and then what are you here to do? Your name, your pronoun, your church, clergy, or laity, and what are you here to do? And I invite you just to 2 or 3 of you, and I'll give you 5 minutes to do this. Come back. Don't worry. This is your woe for the rest of the day, your person that you're working on excellence with. So you will continue to have conversation. So we're going to be doing a lot of interactivity. I'm going to invite you to grab your phones if you can. And you can use the QR code. And I want you to respond to the prompt of what you talked about in your small group of what are you here to do. You can also go to menti.com and type in that code 62285295 and just respond to that prompt around what are you here to do. I'm going to see if it's working. This is just a test run. We're going to do this one more time in the presentation. So yeah, if you go to menti.com, type in the code 62285295. What are you here to do? Wonderful. Wonderful. It's growing. Great. I'm gonna see if I can do this. Oh, perfect. Here we go.
Laura, can you put the QR code back up again?
I can.
Or just tell it to us?
Yeah, if you go to menti.com, the code is 62285295. And I'm actually gonna present it as well so we can see it together. Y'all are able to see?
Yes.
Oh no, what happened? Okay, it just changed. Technology, so many things. Okay, enter full screen. Lovely. Okay, so what are we here to do? Learn, grow. Let's see, what are some others? Build community, engage, share, listen for stories. Excellent. We're going to be doing a lot of that. Embrace all of God's people. Amen. Amen. Connect, be open, thrive, fellowship. Oh, participate. Excellent. Excellent. The big one is to learn. Well, thank you all so much. That is a little teaser.
Give us the code again. 6228.
It's also on the screen. Yeah, 62285295.
Hang on, those are the back end of the screen, so let me write it down.
I got it.
Okay.
And we're going to use that same code. We're not changing it.
Okay.
62285295. Hear a joke or two? Oh, okay. Someone's going to have to come to the mic for that. And maybe we can tell a joke during break. Awesome. Anyone having any issues? Because I do want us to be able to use that for another prompt later in the presentation. I'm happy to pause.
Yes, one pause would be great, thank you.
Say that again.
Hang on, Laura.
No worries. We're going to build this together.
One moment to pause, so we make sure everyone is connected to the Menti so they know how to do it going forward.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay. Yes.
Develop, receive, spread the word.
Okay. Anyone else have trouble connecting to Menti before we move on? Thank you for your patience, Laura.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you all for responding. Keep sharing your responses. We're gonna have one more prompt, but this is excellent. Looks like the majority of the room is here to learn. I love this phrase, love the disenfranchised. I appreciate that. Peace, bridge to community collaboration. Excellent, excellent. Thank you all so much. Let me go back to sharing my slides. Okay. Okay, are you all still seeing the main slide, not my notes?
We see the QR code with the Menti.
Perfect. Awesome, awesome. All right, so let's jump into theological foundations. Thank you so much. So we are gathered here, right, as a faith community, and in our United Methodist tradition, our social teachings are one part of our shared witness. So at the postponed 2020 General Conference, we voted to approve the revised social principles, where in the preamble, we as the church affirm this. From the beginning, God called us into covenant, bound with God, with one another, with God's wonderfully diverse creation. God called us further to live lovingly in those relationships. So in this 40-page document, our worldwide church agreed upon these prayerful and biblical statements, right? Call us to live lovingly. And I'm drawn to these words, and I'm curious about how do we live lovingly? How do we live lovingly in a world that is on fire, where we see violence, the violation of human rights from the US-Mexico border, Eastern Congo, Sudan, the cries heard throughout Gaza, even in our own neighborhoods and streets? How do we live lovingly that affirms the abundance of God, the vision of God's beloved community that God calls us to live into? So the love that Jesus describes in Matthew 22, when he speaks to the greatest commandment, is a love that is deeply relational and mutual in understanding and practice. Throughout the gospel message, Jesus proclaims that we love in relationship with God, our neighbor, and this love requires our whole selves, all of us, our heart, our soul, our mind. This relational love is the truth of the gospel message, where God gave God's Son, Jesus Christ, whose life, ministry, death, and resurrection through the presence of the Holy Spirit provides us with this gift of abundant life. And in our acceptance of that gift of abundant life as people of faith, we become a witness of God's love that is alive in us. This is our call and central to who we are as people of Christian faith, as United Methodist. So John Wesley writes that the gospel of Christ knows no religion but social, no holiness but social holiness. So in the United Methodist Church, social holiness is this theological understanding of the greatest commandment to love God and to love your neighbor. And as United Methodists, we believe that we're not holy by ourselves, but we experience the holiness of God when we are in a relationship with God, ourselves, and our community. And as the church, we embrace and we share the witness of social holiness by cultivating relationships in our communities that reveal God's love and grace. Right? Social holiness is our witness and practice of that love and grace in the world. So at the General Board of Church and Society, we are tasked with equipping you all, members of the United Methodist Church, to live out your social holiness through the implementation of social principles and other policy statements that the General Conference has taken a position on. So GBCS is one of 13 agencies of the United Methodist Church. We address more than 30 different social issues within the priorities of health, immigration, poverty, peace, and climate. And we communicate the church's positions to the United Methodist Church, policymakers, and leaders through our tools of advocacy, education, and organizing. So all of these resources are designed to equip and build the capacity of you all, members of the United Methodist Church, to live out your faith, to seek justice, pursue peace as God has called us to in the church and society. So organizing, right? Organizing is one of these ways that we as United Methodists proclaim our social witness in the world. So I know many of us are invested in creating change in different ways, whether that is direct service or self-help through empowering community leaders, advocacy. Maybe you've been to your state legislature already. I know and work with some of you. Kathy Harkey, don't know if you're in the room, but you're incredible, grateful for your witness, as well as some other folks in the Wisconsin Annual Conference who've been testifying at your state legislature. But also there is this unique strategic tool that's called organizing, right? And if there's anything I want you to take away, it's this really basic definition that organizing is bringing people together to create change. Literally, organizing is bringing people together to create change. But when we talk about faith-based organizing, we're bringing people together in relationship with God and each other, right? That's a key point, in relationship with God and each other, that share this common passion and vision to work on a specific strategy around an issue that seeks change to create concrete improvements in our lives, right? So direct service, self-empowerment, advocacy, all of that is a part of organizing. But organizing, especially when we talk about faith-based organizing, is bringing together those specific strategies, and it creates a specific kind of plan of action that transforms conditions of injustice, that really gets to those systems. So when we talk about faith-based organizing here at Church and Society, there's two questions that we often begin our journey to how we understand change and how we understand what plan of action we're going to take to achieve that change. And so the first is, what are we changing? And so this question is like, really, what needs to change in our community? And how does change, systemic change, really happen? How do we create the strategies and action plans to get there? And so when we talk about change, we're really asking this question about, what is the change required to transform the conditions of injustice that we are experiencing every day? How do we get to those roots of injustice? You know, many of us may have food pantries, and there's this question of, why does food insecurity exist in my zip code in the first place? What created this food apartheid? What are the systems behind it that in a country with plenty, so many do not have, right? Really being able to answer that question, to do a deep dive around that. And then the second is, what are we building? How are we building the support teams, the strong networks, the resources in order for this systemic change to be addressed in an intentional and purposeful way? What coalitions and movements? Some of you may be involved in the Poor People's Campaign, or some of you may be involved with Faith in Action, that used to be known as People in Action, PICO, right? Who are we connected to that is also working towards that change? So one of the things that we often use here at Church and Society is this cycle of change. How do we organize for change? And it all starts really with this vision that holds your responses of, what are we changing? What are we building? When we're talking about addressing systemic injustice in our community, what is our vision for transforming that? And what do we need to build? We need to name that, right? As the prophet Habakkuk says, we need to write the vision and make it clear. And so as people of faith, how do we take what God has called us to do, what God has called us to bring about in our communities, and create a tangible vision around that? And then with that vision, which is what we're going to dive into today, we start sharing this vision with those in our congregations, with those in our zip code, with our decision makers, whether that is your state legislature, your members of Congress, to see who else is engaged in this vision of change with you, right? Who else, whether that is a congregant or again a decision maker? Is there a specific other organizing collective or a different movement or coalition that is also addressing the issue that you are interested in engaging in your community? And then with those relationships, again, we do this deep dive. If you can think back to that definition that I named about organizing, right? What is the strategy that seeks to address a specific issue, right? There's so many different issues, right? But how within our vision can we get really clear about what are we trying to transform minutely, right? Like if it can just be this one thing that leads us to that concrete improvement, right? And so with those relationships, with those movements, that's where you begin to really do this research of what is it that we can actually transform in the here and now that will ultimately lead us to that vision of change that we are trying to achieve. And then that research informs your strategy and action planning, right? So what are the different tactics? So whether that is we are going to transform food insecurity in our zip code. And so first we want to create awareness in our community. Then we want to talk to our city council person. Then we want to address it through policy, whether that's a city council or the state level. So those are including the different aspects of change around direct service with providing our community with a direct need, all the way to advocacy. All of those are different tactics that move us to the concrete improvements. And so eventually, the hope is that we achieve this part of our cycle where we get to that concrete change, where we achieve the vision. Sometimes we don't always get there, but this, even the moment of concrete change and transformation, is a moment of evaluation to see what either prevented, what was an obstacle that got in the way of the vision. What do we need to rethink, or what do we need to retwink so that we can move towards the vision that we have named in our communities? And so what this can tangibly look like, excuse me, I'll talk about what's happened here in DC. I'm a member of the Baltimore Washington Annual Conference. Many of you probably have known or heard on the news or been involved with the reality of migrants moving from the US-Mexico border to different parts in the US. And in 2022, Governor Abbott in Texas started busing migrants to Washington, D.C. and dropping them off probably a 10-minute walk from our building at Union Station. And many knew that this was like a political front, but the saddened reality of him using migrants to as almost kind of like a scapegoat. But we as the faith community knew that regardless of what Governor Abbott was up to or what Congress wasn't doing, we needed to respond. And so we came together as a faith community and welcomed those migrants at Union Station. And for the last 2 years, have been servicing and supporting them through accompaniment. And I remember a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, where with the United Methodist congregations here, we asked this question of like, how do we do this intentionally? What is our vision? We know that the immigration system is broken in the US, but how can we welcome with dignity? How can we welcome with justice and equity? What is our vision for doing that? And so with relationships that I'd already been working with in terms of the United Methodists here in the district, we were able to kind of do some research about what churches have different resources to address the different needs of migrants. And so we're able to identify that migrants needed just immediate support when they arrived in DC. They needed transportation to their next location, and they also needed shelter. And so it was beautiful what happened where we had, even myself included, we picked up migrants who were traveling, arrived at DC. We took them to another United Methodist church that was working with a coalition that had resources to support migrants to get to their next location. And those folks, once they got their bus ticket, we took them to another United Methodist who was able to shelter them. And then the next day they were on their way. And so what we named around this vision of dignity, even though that lacks within our immigration system, was made possible through the ways that we collaborated. But the beautiful thing is that it wasn't just in our direct service. Also, those members, those clergy persons and laity gathered and they mobilized with their city council. When DC was like, no more service to migrants, we showed up to give testimony about why this is so important. We continue to show up even today as the Biden administration has has ended asylum for after a certain number at the US-Mexico border, right? So kind of coming back to the concrete change, we're constantly asking, how is that happening? How is that shifting? But it's possible through relationships. And so I hope that kind of gives a concrete image of what that looks like. I know you all may have some questions. So if you do, can we write them down, Lisa, and just probably have them passed to you, and we'll see what questions we can answer during the break. That would be very helpful. So I would just, if you have questions, write them down, pass them to Lisa or Sue, and then I can see which ones we can answer during the break. But for now, we're going to keep on moving. So pastor and organizer Alexia Salvatierra shares this about faith-rooted community organizing. She says that faith-rooted organizing imagines a new world based on the prophetic imagination of faith traditions and seeks to carve out a path of activism shaped by the values and virtues of these faith traditions. Right? Our faith roots in us a vision for social justice, a vision for bringing about dignity, equity, redistribution, reconciliation in our communities. And so I want us to really reflect on what are the biblical, the traditional, the social principles, whether those are the old or the revised, that informs what our faith calls us to build and transform in the world. So we're gonna jump into another Menti activity. I'll invite you, if you had a question on anything that I named before, please write that down. But right now, go again to menti.com, type in your code and just take a minute to reflect. And then 1 to 2 words describe what are the values, the principles, the virtues that your faith calls you to build in the world. And before you do that, hold on 1 second, y'all. I wanna make sure. All right, so sorry, y'all. I will take a screenshot of it, but so that y'all can see it. Unfortunately, Menti, that is as big as it's gonna go, which is just so weird. It usually gets bigger, but I think it's just the amount of responses. So just want to name a couple around what are the values and virtues that your faith calls you to build in the community and world, and what you all name: justice, empathy, belonging, acceptance, forgiveness, healing, common purpose, understanding, network, giving, abundance, integrity, equality, care for those in need, non-judgmental, shalom, and wholeness. Okay. Thank you all so much for participating. Continue to add that in. We're gonna take a 5-minute break, just 5 minutes. And during that time, Lisa, if you want to switch the camera, if there are questions, please bring them to the front. So I invite you to take a stretch, stand up, take your eyes off the screen, talk to your fellow whoa, check in, and we'll come back around 10:10. So it's actually 6 minutes. So enjoy this time.
One question is, how can we work even on identifying needs for change and naming passion within our congregation, a common passion within our congregation and or with our neighbors and colleagues? And I'm guessing you're going to be answering some of that question as you go on in your training.
Yeah.
The other one is, What are your strategies of building common political analysis in the research stage? Is this company good for our community or exploitative? How to build common analysis of our situation? That was an example. So our strategy of building common political analysis in the research stage.
Sue, can you repeat that question one more time, please?
Sure. So what are your strategies of building common political analysis in the research stage? For instance, researching whether a company is good for the community or not. And how to build a common analysis of the situation. And again, that may be part of what you're going to be training us on, or you can build a little of that into the training rather than just answering it specifically now. It's up to you.
Yeah, let's stop there with the questions, because I can definitely will answer those in this part. But specifically to speak to the different political analysis, I think I've had this conversation with a lot of colleagues and dear friends about the shift from when the church was this place of offering political education, and now we don't do that as much. Politics, if you have engaged in our most recent toolkit, Building for Change, even the language of politics has become really polarizing and challenging in our churches. And so I think one of the most helpful things, which is what my primary focus is for today, is how do we really start with our stories? Because even within the analysis part, that analysis connects to a specific experience, and often an experience that does not represent the whole, that does not represent those who are directly impacted. And I think the most important thing when we talk about organizing is we are addressing power, and we are addressing those who have been told that they do not have power, and we're bringing folks together to, as Alexia Salvatierra says, reimagine that we are the powerful. And so we need to reimagine systems that affirm the power that is within us, that power that comes from the Holy Spirit. And so often that analysis comes from what are the relationships that aren't in this room that help us get to the questions of there's something missing from this work of justice. There's something missing from this campaign. When I go back to that example around addressing asylum, the reason we were able to identify the roles of shelter, transportation, and supportive services was because migrants kept coming back to the church and sharing with us their needs, right? It wasn't this understanding around what we were doing, but it was really being able to speak with and be in relationship with folks who are directly impacted, with those who were being bused to the DC area to tell us what they needed, and how they wanted to build together and how they understood dignity. And so I truly believe that stories, and we're going to get into that, stories for change, really get to how that analysis centers those who are often left out of the conversation. And we can continue to talk about that. Thank you so much for your question. And we're going to get to the other question in the story for us. So let's go ahead and jump on in. So, right, our values and virtues of our faith ground our personal and collective stories, especially for stories for change. So community organizer and professor Marshall Gans says that stories teach us how to act and inspire us to act. That stories not only teach us how to act, but they inspire us how to act. And this way of being able to inspire us to act is what Marshall Gans calls a public story. And so if we go back to that organizing cycle that I took you all through, that answers these two questions around what are we changing and what are we building? When you take the time to respond to those two questions, you are building your public story, right? What are you changing in terms of being able to be clear around why am I called here? This is the first part of the story of self. And then the story of us really addresses this question about what am I building? Who are the teams, coalitions that share my same values and interests? All of this makes up your public story. So for Marshall Ganz, right, a story that creates change is known as your public story. And let me take a step back. There are three parts. There's a story of self that asks the question, why am I called here? What are my values? What are my interests for this commitment of justice that I have been called to? What's the story of us? What are the values, the interests that I share with my community? You know, often when we are engaged in the work of justice, we sometimes make the mistake of not centering those who are in our community, making the assumption of what folks need rather than being truly in community and in solidarity with those who are directly impacted, so that we know, really know in relationship with folks, what are the values, the interests of the community that we are in service to, and that we are building this vision of change with, right? It's not that we're doing things for the community, but we're doing things with the community, because when we're committed to change, it impacts all of us. Then the final part of a public story is the story of now. And we're going to address this at our last activity for the day, that really says, what is the specific action that we can take together? After I'm clear about why I'm called to this work, what are my own values and interests, after I'm clear about why my own community is called to this work, what their values and interests are, what passions that they hold, what is the one specific action that we can take together? And that specific action often comes out of relationships, really talking to one another. And that is what we are going to jump into today. Excuse me. So you may have heard, if you've had an organizing training, I think one of the basic but also most powerful tools, it's called a one-to-one, also known as a relational meeting in some circles. And a one-to-one is this intentional relationship building practice that engages personal and social interests to build power, to initiate actions for social change, and reflect on how the change will impact our community. It's important to note that these are intentional conversations. And as one of my dear friends and colleagues says, one-to-ones are not one and dones. These one-to-one conversations are a step towards, right, that concrete vision of change that we are trying to achieve. One-to-ones are helping us build and respond to that question about what are we building in order to achieve change. So I'm not going to read through all of these. There's just a couple I want to highlight. Thank you so much, Lisa and Sue. You should have like a packet of how to relationship build. That is, all of these are included within that packet.
They are, the packets are other places.
Thank you. And so if you want to, you can continue to do a deep dive and reflection around the pieces that I'm about to name. So when we think about one-to-ones as an intentional relationship practice, it's important to consider what are the outcomes. And often in this work of justice, in this work of building towards liberation, it can be very isolating. But the beauty of one-to-ones relational meetings, is that they break isolation between individual communities by getting to really know who is in the room, who you are wanting to build with, who this person in your church is. I know when I was a licensed local pastor in Baltimore, the year right after Freddie Gray was murdered, the first thing that I did in my congregation when I was called to that appointment was one-to-ones every single week, both within the community and within the congregation, to really hear and understand where my community was in this time of deep pain that the city of Baltimore was experiencing. The other thing that I want to name is one of the outcomes with one-to-ones relational meetings is the ability to identify common ground on how to build the organizing campaign. A lot of organizing work does happen through a campaign. Campaigns are a specific plan of action or strategy that we named earlier within that organizing cycle. Under the strategy and plan of action would be a campaign that helps us move towards that concrete change that we're naming. But in a relational meeting, a one-to-one, we're able to understand and see what are the values and interests of this individual that I'm speaking to, and do they align with the work that I'm building towards? And then the last thing that I want to name around outcomes, well, two things actually from the slide, that allows individuals to build a commitment to the community and a greater vision. Often, I think I hear this a lot of, one of the partners that I work with in the BWC and other areas, BWC stands for Baltimore Washington Annual Conference, apologies, is the sense of there's no one else, we've run out of all volunteers. One-to-ones relational meetings are a purpose of recruitment, not just in building your team, but often when your team gets tired or when you are identifying burnout with folks you're already working with. One-to-ones also help with recruitment, or even revisiting where your team is and understanding the commitments to the vision that maybe you named earlier, but need to check in and see if this is still in alignment with right now. And then the other thing that I will name is that one-to-ones build trust, right? The quote is missing me right now. Oh man, I use this all the time. The sense of the speed of change happens through trust. I probably am articulating it differently. But often when we think about the pace of change, it happens through the trust that we have with those in our congregations as well in our communities. And building that trust happens with relational meetings, one-to-ones, being able to sit down and have intentional conversations around what is important to us. What are those values and interests that are aligned with building the vision that we have for our communities? So again, this is all in your packet. I'm just going to name these two so we can kind of get into some time of practice. So with a one-to-one, the focus is on building a relationship, not achieving an outcome. I want to bring in author and social activist Grace Lee Boggs, who affirms that when we're building towards social transformation, it's truly about critical connections rather than critical mass. I stress this often, there's a difference between organizing and mobilizing. When we're talking about organizing, right, coming back to that simple definition of that we are bringing people together for the purpose of creating change. Organizing is a specific leadership practice. We want to make sure that the work is often out of our hands as even individuals who are holders of the visions, and truly in the hands of the community that's directly impacted, the community that feels powerless, and being able to reimagine, kind of even rebuild with those folks. Where mobilizing is often just bringing together mass amounts of people, but often we're not identifying those leaders, often step forward that one specific time. And yes, leaders can come out of those mobilizing moments, but through organizing, through these relationship meetings, we are being really intentional with who is the community, what is the commitment towards change that we're building. So I just want to name that in a one-to-one, we're really focused on the relationship building, not just achieving the specific outcome, so that we're building the team, the community that we need to sustain the vision of justice that we've committed to, not just as individuals, but as the collective. And then the other thing I want to name from this slide is a one-to-one. I'll just think about the unique experiences, the stories, the perspectives that strengthen and enhance our organizing work. Often, sometimes we get into bubbles in our congregations, and we forget that it is so much bigger than us. And when we're having one-to-ones, whether that's in members of our congregations or with business owners on our block, we are able to realize different pieces of the story to really recraft and reimagine what change looks like for our community. And so there's a real importance with one-to-ones of being able to identify the unique experiences and stories that really shape why we're committed to change in the first place. So what a one-to-one is and what it is not. So I'm going to first start with what it is. So again, it's a time to share stories. It's a reciprocal sharing. It's limited 45 minutes. I would even say 30 minutes to an hour. I've had a 3-hour one-to-one. It's not successful. I do not recommend it. Again, one-to-ones are intentional, specific time-oriented conversations. So 3 hours, the dinner it was long, but it wasn't what it needed to be. We seek talent, vision. What's the energy behind being a part of this vision that we are both naming? And then it's also an opportunity. Maybe this person that you're engaged in a one-to-one doesn't align with your values, doesn't align with the vision, but they may know someone else who you need to talk to engage with. And so one-to-ones are also, those are the opportunities to connect with other people, to identify different piece of the puzzle, the vision that you're building that you may not have seen yet. So what a one-to-one is not, it's not a casual conversation. Again, these are intentional conversations. It's not an opportunity to sell your cause. And let me pause real quick because I don't know if I'm gonna ruffle any feathers with this. It's not an opportunity to convert. Often with organizing, there's this understanding that we will revitalize our congregation. We will strengthen or bring more members into the church. Organizing is a specific strategy to create change. And for pastors and laity, for the church in the room, I just offer that organizing helps us be a better church. And when we do it well, the community, the church will grow regardless. But that is not the end goal, right? When we organize, our end goal is not about revitalizing or vitality. The end goal truly is to transform conditions of injustice. And when we are transforming those conditions of injustice, that is how we deepen our churches. That is how we grow our churches. But organizing in itself is not a church vitality tool. And I just want to stress that. And happy to continue the dialogue around that as well. A one-to-one, again, it's not unlimited time. Do not do the 3-hour meeting. Excuse me. It's not an unfocused conversation. For my pastors in the room, including myself, I've gotten in trouble with this. It's not a pastoral counseling session or spiritual direction session, right? This is an intentional relationship building opportunity. Again, with that intentionality, a one-to-one is not with anyone. You're being clear about maybe you were at a council meeting and you heard someone testify. And I'm hoping all of us as members in our community are showing up at our council meetings and you heard someone testify and you're like, wow, I want to hear more about this person. And so you would approach them for a one-to-one. Or maybe there is a member in your community who is receiving services from one of the ministries that you offer and share some challenges with you, or even just offers you a word of gratitude. You could do a one-to-one with them to hear more about how the ministry is meeting their needs or is not meeting their needs. You can have a one-to-one with a congregant who, if you're a clergy person or laity, maybe you're preaching from the pulpit, is challenged by a message that you're sharing. Set up some time with them and hear more about why was this challenging, right? There's so many opportunities to really be intentional and identify persons who maybe push us or challenge us, but are also there to build with us. And so even in those moments of conflict or challenge, there's opportunities to generate something beautiful. And it's important, one-to-one is not where you are talking the whole time. It is, and I'm going to talk about that in my next slide. One-to-ones, going back to what it is, it's reciprocal. And often if you're asking for the one-to-one, you're sharing 30% of the time and the other person is sharing the rest of the time, the 70%. So with preparing for your one-to-one, it's important to prepare to brainstorm who you should speak to. And you can think about that right now. Who are the first three people, that come to mind that you could sit down with and have a one-to-one? Who are the folks that you're probably curious about? Maybe they're wearing a t-shirt one day that you're like, I want to know what that means or why that person is wearing that t-shirt, right? Begin thinking about who do you want to have this intentional conversation with? And then when you've identified that person, right, one-to-ones are intentional conversations. When you reach out to them, be intentional about what's the purpose of this conversation? What are you hoping to identify, achieve, invite that person to participate with you in? Is there an idea that you have around how you hope to see your community thrive in a different way? Are you challenged by something and you want to dialogue with them in order to, again, identify their values, their passion and interest, and see if this person can build with you? And then going back, step 3, thinking and reflecting on your public story, right? Why are you called to this work of justice and liberation? What are the values and interests that inform that? What are the values and interests that you hope to identify with this other person who's part of your community, that story of us? And then continuing in conversation together to work towards them. What's the specific action, the story of now that you both can take together? Is it identifying another person who can join you both in this work? Is it attending a city council meeting? Is it hosting a workshop, right? Being able to reflect on your own experiences of what you're bringing to this conversation that you probably can both engage and deepen in this intentional conversation that you're engaging with this person. All right, so let's set up a one-to-one. Who's ready? Anyone ready? Yeah, maybe hands. Woohoo! Great. All right, so with setting up a one-to-one, it's important to have a specific time and place. Most of my job is virtual. Sometimes it's in person. I think it's a reality of the pandemic, but a lot of my one-to-ones happen virtually. I think there's some different challenges with that, to be honest. I think one-to-ones are great when you can do them in person. And one-to-ones, I'm going to stress this, especially as a faith community. Don't invite folks back to your church office. Go into the community and have a one-to-one, whether, especially at your local library. Those are excellent places. Engage your local library, a local business, where you and the other person can really envision, okay, what is already in your community that helps you build towards that vision of change? And maybe it is your church. You know, some churches have cool areas where they are in co-working spaces, right? But you know, I think may we reimagine the different spaces that we can occupy that have us really proximate to our communities. So I'll just offer that. One thing that I wanted to name, again, with setting up the relationship one-to-one, I keep calling it relational, meaning keep going back and forth. They both mean the same thing. 30% sharing, 70% listening. Again, begin by sharing your own story, your story of self, of why you're called, being able to listen around your story of us. Why are they called? What are their values, their interests? And being able to ask questions. The basic questions about why you're called, that's helpful, as well as being able to, you know, what are your values around justice? What are your interests? And then also, who's your community? Who are your people that you do this work with? Who are you accountable to? and really be able to kind of build a sense of who is this person that you're engaged with. What are their interests lie? Where do their values lie that align with yours to build towards the vision of justice and liberation that you've already identified in your community? And also, how in this conversation is this person shifting your vision of justice, shifting your vision of liberation, of what that may or may not look like? And so one other thing I want to name, and this is specifically for this time of sharing and listening, and this comes from the resource I'm really grateful for called Climate Voices, Ethical Storytelling. And it's that often, especially as faith leaders, I do think that we have to own and recognize our own positionality and privilege. That often when we are engaging in one-to-ones in the community, we need to be at least aware of what it means to be a person of faith and what challenges might be there. Not to make the assumption of that, but just to hold that tenderly. Because there may be some folks that have some challenges or have experienced church hurt, and maybe and I think in setting up the one-to-one or even reaching out to them, to be cautious and understanding of that, right? And I think that's why it's important to maybe have these one-to-ones outside of the church too. And what the ethical storytelling principle that I just want to offer is that sharing our story can be a vulnerable experience, right? Especially with persons who may not be comfortable with faith leaders. And it is our job as a listener, the one who is asked for the one-to-one, to hold space for that person in that moment. Because there is a power and privilege in hearing someone's personal and sacred story. And this should be acknowledged. And it's also important to ask, and I do this in my facilitation sometimes, and I offer this, of how does my personal, professional, and even intellectual positionality and the identity that you hold, your values, experiences, I'm aware of, I'm a highly educated African-American woman. When I go into different spaces, that's not always received, right? And so how do I hold that positionality and privilege as I engage in one-to-ones? And so I just want to offer that in the sharing and listening, right? That we do need to hold space as listeners. And that time of being able to share and exchange stories is sacred. And so to be aware of our positionality and privilege in that sharing. And then lastly, that I want to offer is that with a one-to-one, again, it's an opportunity to invite that person into your work. If you're already engaged in that vision building, if there's an event that's happening that you want to invite that person into, it's an opportunity to evaluate if this person is a good individual to join your team. And it's also to evaluate if there's another person to talk to, if they're not a good fit. So just know that those are helpful ways to engage when we're thinking about setting up a one-to-one. Again, if you have questions, don't forget to write those down and pass them along to Lisa or Sue, or maybe Sue, so we can get to them. So we're going to get into some practice. But first, I'm going to drop some community agreements. Typically, I let y'all make these yourselves, but since we're virtual and we're on the time, I'm going to offer these for you all. I invite you, when you engage in these one-to-ones that you're going to be doing in the room with your woes, people you're working on excellence with, to stay open and curious, to share with love and respect. Again, to share what you want to share and to be mindful of others, just with what you say. So with that person that you did introductions with, that's who I want you to engage in terms of the one-to-one. And I want you all to share your story of self or why you're called to this work of justice and liberation in your community. What are your values? And then what are the values and interests that you share with your community? Hold off on the story of now. We're going to get that in the final activity. But I do also want to say, if y'all are talking and something sparks of like, oh, there is a specific action that we can do together, begin to name that, like, allow the Holy Spirit to lead in all the ways. But I invite you to practice that. Excuse me, where are we at time? It's 10:45. Okay. So y'all can take a break. I gave y'all a break from 10:45 to 10:50 if you need that. Do y'all need a break or you want to jump into one-to-ones? Let me know that later. So now I'm going to invite you for the next 20 minutes. You're going to engage in your one-to-ones with the person sitting next to you or whoever you did your introductions with. Again, I just want you to focus on your story of self. Why are you called to this work? What are your values? What are your passions, your interests? And then if you know the interests of your community or the values that you may be able to identify, and by your community, I do mean your congregations, but if you know that of your neighborhood, that would be awesome too. And then I'm going to invite you to, if you're able to address the story of now, that's great, but we're also going to address that in our last activity. But I just want you to focus on the first two questions. So go ahead and break up into groups. Yes.
This is Sue, but you have us sharing 30% of the time and listening 70% of the time. And if we all each do that in our groups, there's going to be a lot of silence.
So here's the clarity.
One person to take the lead in this as the inviter, and then the other the invitee.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that clarifying question. So I want you kind of to go back and forth. So one, of course, is the invitee into the one-to-one, as Sue stated, and then one is the one who responds, and switch back and forth with that. I do want to offer, if you could just do groups of 2 to 3, that would be great, because the time is going to be about 20 minutes. And just correct me if I'm wrong, Sue and Lisa, is that would have us back at 11:15? Is that correct?
That's,
I mean, 10:15, is that?
yeah, well, 11:15.
Oops, I didn't hear.
About 11:15 is right. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Any other clarifying questions with that? Thank you. Thank you all so much for just engaging in that deep dialogue. I hope that was refreshing. I hope it offered what it needed to for this time. I would love, let's 3 minutes. I'm so sorry, y'all. We're like on time. I want to make sure we get through the presentation, but I also want to give you all some time to dialogue about what was challenging, what was affirming, what resonated with you for that time. If I could get maybe 1 to 2 people, 1 to 2, really stress the 2, to come forward and share, that would be great.
Anyone?
Anybody want to share your debrief or do a debriefing? Was there anything that surprised you in how having these conversations?
Hello, I'm Robin Secret. I'm from the Chris Bareboot, and something that I found like enlightening about the conversation was the want to do something about things. Talking about it makes you really want to do things, and then actually plan it out in your mind. Like we were talking about both climate change and people in need, like who don't have families because the family rejected them, and that makes me want to actually really do something about it. Because yes, I think about those things all the time, but if I'm actually talking about it, I'm more likely to come up with a plan to want to do something.
Yes, thank you so much. Our stories are supposed to inspire us to act, as Marshall Gann said. Thank you so much for that.
Another one?
One more. Thank you.
Hi, Tina Itzen, she, her, hers. I'm ordained deacon serving at the ACLU Wisconsin and Wauwatosa Avenue. I think one of these things, like you do these, some of us have done a lot of these, but it's always like remembering and having to process yourself the answers to the questions. You know, that sort of prep showing up and going, well, what are my values around this? You know, we sometimes, when we're in this work so much, we just assume we know these things, but to take the time to really think and process, like, well, why do I attend the church that I do? Why do I participate in these kinds of things? What are the values that I have that I bring to the table? And it's always interesting as you're having those conversations with people and they're reflecting their values, the way that kind of inspires things in you to go, oh yeah, I have that value as well. So I always find that to be a really great part of these conversations.
Thank you. And shout out deacons and ACLU in the room. Oh my goodness. Y'all are a powerhouse. I know there's just so many great things. Thank you. Thank you for the debrief, the affirmation that these are both the reminders of why we do this, but also how we inspire one another. And I was intentional. I know that one-to-ones look really different. Often you practice with another person on another example of someone who's not in the room, but I wanted you all to practice with one another because you all, as an annual conference, as faith leaders, need to be in deeper relationship with one another, need to be sharing your gifts, your resources, your values, and see how among you all, how you all can build towards the visions that you have maybe individually named, but not have collectively walked in together. So I hope that this is not the only time that you all will be having these one-to-ones, that even after you can set up some side conversations that are, 30 minutes to an hour, maybe weekly, maybe monthly, where you can continue to see how each of you can be in deeper alignment to build the worlds that we deserve as a church and as a community. So thank you so much for participating. We're going to keep it moving because it's 11:21 and I have a hard stop at noon. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I know lunch is important. All right. Okay, so the last thing, and I hope this engages us in the story of now. Our story of now is asset mapping. It is a favorite tool of mine. It's a tool that one can use around that strategy and action planning. It's a tool that, as a kind of this blurb, asset mapping, I believe, these are definitely my words, other people could say, I believe it's a spiritual practice that reframes our mindset by centering our abundance in the resources we have within us and in our communities. I think asset mapping is a way to move beyond the scarcity mindset and realize that we have so much among us that we need to kind of tap into to build the power we need to achieve the purpose and visions that we have set forth and that God has set forth within us. So what are our assets? Your assets are uniquely specific to you. They are gifts, persons, places, ideas that you share in your community. So often with asset mapping and the way that I'll go back to this slide that Luther K. Snow does is for your congregation, right? So when I served as a licensed local pastor in Baltimore, I did this asset mapping as a reverse offering. It was incredible to see what within the local church context, the resources that were available to us in our congregation to address a very specific thing, which was just being a more hospitable community where we were serving. And so within asset mapping, there's a way that you can do this for your congregation. However, for us today, I do want you to think about yourselves specifically. I want you to think about what you personally have access to. You are the asset. That is what we're addressing. And you as the asset are coming together with other assets in the room, and we're going to create our story of now. And so Luther K. Snow identifies 5 different assets. There's this individual, which is you, the physical, institutional, economic, associations. And let me just take a step back. I feel like I'm kind of rushing through this a little bit. Apologies. With your physical, it's a thing that you can touch, see, and feel. If you are a person who has access to a church building and you are the pastor and you can do anything in that sanctuary that is worshipful, you have a physical resource. Individual talents, you don't have to write this down. It's the next slide, but if you want to, feel free to. Your talents, are you an artist? Are you a singer? Are you a storyteller? What perspectives and skills do you have? And also what others in the room do not even know that you have. That's important. Associations, volunteer groups like Big Brother, Big Sister, maybe you're in Greek life, part of the Divine Nine. And then institutions are different. This goes to the question that Lisa asked about organizing within our connectional system. I think we must remember that organizing, right, bringing people together to create change is a leadership practice. And within the United Methodist Church, because of our connectional system, we should be easy to organize. However, there are often challenges. And I think when you think about this resource as an institution, reflect on what parts of the institution are you connected to, right? Do you serve on a board of one of our agencies? Are you a part of G-Core Church and Society committee? Are you a person of United Women in Faith? So there are different, and you could say that United Women in Faith would be an association, and one of the institutional or agencies that I named would be an institutional structure. But I just want to affirm that being connected to one of those organizations or bodies within our institution is an asset, right? Lift that up, because there may be resources that you haven't even kind of tapped into yet. And then I'll even say beyond the connectional structure, there may be businesses that you're part of. You may be connected to local nonprofits. You may even have your own LLC, right? Like, what are those different different institutions that you can kind of affirm that you're connected to? And then where do you spend your money? This is a hard one. A lot of us don't want to say this. But I think as much as we ask for institutional accountability around transparency, it's important for us to reflect on where do our resources go, especially when we're saying that we're committed to change, but how are we invested in that? How are we invested in that, even with our own finances, and just kind of thinking through that a little bit. I think I named them all. Okay, beautiful. So you don't have to use your phone, your notebook. You can use the worksheet. Can you all hold that up? Can you hold the worksheet up? Yes, fabulous. Shout out to Canva. So typically this is not how I do asset mapping. However, we have to shift. And so you have one piece of paper. The beauty of asset mapping when you have beautiful, colorful Post-its is that you're able to move them and you're able to kind of see the breadth of all the assets among you. So it really, like, visually, it reframes resets your mind to say that, oh, as a church, we don't have anything. You can be like, oh, look at all of the resources that we have because they're right before you. So because it's all on one worksheet, it's great. You'll still be able to see all of your assets. But I also want you, maybe we could take a picture at the end with everyone holding their assets so you can see the abundance that's among you. Can you all see this slide? Is it very small?
Tell her what happened here.
It's, Lisa, Laura, it's small and we lost one of our projectors in the
Oh,
room.
no.
So, maybe if you just give us a second, maybe if you guys
When I migrate this direction, you'll be able to see, and we'll work on getting that in the projector back up.
Okay. Can okay. As we pivot, we're good. Okay, we're good. But okay, I'm gonna read through the questions. And we're gonna spend some time. Excuse me, I need to see my time. Okay, it's 11:30. Sorry, y'all. I just want to. Okay, all right. Wow, we're on time. Okay. All right, so we're gonna start with individual because I think that's the first one on the top. So with your individual, and I'm just reading the questions.
First one is physical that you have.
I'm sorry.
The first is physical, the second is individual.
Oh, even on the sheet. Okay, that's
On
fine.
the
Great.
screen. Oh, it might be on the sheet. On the sheet, I'm sorry, I thought you meant on the screen.
That's
No,
okay.
it's on the sheet, it's individual.
Okay. That's okay. As long as they're named, we're going to get through this together. Thank you all for your flexibility. All is well. And so with the individual, I want you really to consider what is your talent? What is your skill that people know you for? Within just know you, right? Like if someone could say, Lisa, Sue, this is their skill, their talent. They're good at telling jokes. They are good at organizing. They're good at bringing conferences together. They are good at printing out things when you ask them. They're amazing, right? What is your skill and talent? And then what's something you can do that people don't even know about? What's something that you can do that people don't even know about? Go, feel free to write this down. We'll just walk through this together. The second one is physical.
Yes. Yeah, you have to.
You're good. Thank
Yes,
you.
it's physical next.
Thank you. What are the 1 or 2 unique physical assets that you have access to? Again, maybe you have the church keys. Maybe you have a boat. Hey, lots of us have different visions. Maybe you need to get on the water. I don't know. But I'm just just offering that. Right? What are the 1 to 2 unique physical assets that you have? Your home, apartment, house. That's a physical asset. Okay, we're going to move to the orange, which should be the institution. What institute? Yeah.
Yes, the green.
What institutions are you a part of? And even to think about what institutions do you partner with? Is there a nonprofit, a local business? Are you connected to your city government? Let's take time to jot that down. And you're just jotting the first 1 to 2 things that come to your mind. And if nothing comes, don't force it. It's all good. Okay, now we're going to move to the groups or associations that you're a part of. Are you a United Women in Faith? Yay! Are you the Church and Society chair? Are you a part of Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts? Do you lead? Are you part of the campus ministry? I know that my best friend is the head of the charcuterie board club in her neighborhood. I was like, it's not really a joke, it's truth. But just, really, and that is an asset because she does a really good job with the charcuterie boards. She sends them to me all the time and they're fabulous. So what groups or associations are you a part of? And maybe you've already gotten there, but the last one should be the green. Where do you spend your money? When you can kind of think about local businesses, returning it back to Offering Point, do you invest in some of the associations that you're a part of? When you think about what you donate, where is it? Where does it go? And there's another question that I ask when we're doing this in a congregation, no context, is where does the annual conference invest most of their financial resources? Um, and if you want to jot that down on the side too, you can also put that for a conversation. But it's the last one. All right. Does anyone need me to repeat a question? Have clarifying thoughts about any of the questions?
I don't see any questions.
Okay. I'm just going to invite us to stand together and grab your worksheets if you can. Yes, get a good stretch. Y'all look around the room in the abundance. Look around the room in the abundance. Hold your sheet up high. There are assets among you. Never again can we say we do not have what we need. In this room, right now, you all have exactly what you need to do the work. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Do you agree that you have what you need?
Yeah.
Do we have what we need?
Yeah.
Do you have what you need? Awesome. Awesome. Good. Yeah. Awesome. May we move in that abundance. Okay, y'all, for the next 10 minutes, you've already done the work of identifying your assets. You may kind of maybe shift them after you share with one another. But with your woe, the person you're working on excellence, who you have done your one-to-one with, who you've done your introductions, I want you all, and this is the key, sometimes this gets hard. So I want you all, using the assets that you have identified, brainstorm 1 to 2 actions you can take together by connecting 2 or more of those assets. So using the assets that you have identified, brainstorm 1 to 2 actions together by connecting 2 or more assets. So what that looks like is maybe you bring a physical asset of an unused church property with an individual asset of a gardening skill to do a cooperative community garden. But I want you to work together with your partner to create that story of now, to create what is this one action based on our values, your giftings, your interests that you can take together. Does that make sense? Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Y'all have 10 minutes. Go.
All right, so everybody call us back together. Laura, are you there, ready?
I am. Thank you so much. Yes. Come back. Come on back. Does not have to be perfect, but hopefully at least you got one action.
Finish your important sentence.
Finish your sentence, your one sentence, but stay in your groups. Stay in your groups is really important.
Be in your groups.
So here's my question for you all as you sit together. At the beginning of today's gathering, I asked you all this question about what are the values and virtues that your faith calls you to build in the world. And you said love, you said justice, you said hope, compassion, empathy, belonging, generosity, all of these beautiful words. I love this. When you think about the action that you came together, that story of now that you created based on your assets, I'm curious about how those actions help you move towards these values and virtues that you affirmed. Are those actions moving us towards compassion, love, respect, generosity, wholeness, healing, safety? And I'd love for 1 to 2 people to respond.
My name's Pat from Merrimack, Wisconsin. I think that it takes all of those feelings I think it takes all these feelings, the compassion, the love, the faith, to work, to come into this, to do the process, because you have to at least care. So I think they're used within the whole process. I don't think they at the end, you may get some new ideas or feelings. But I started with the ones I had.
Joe Keenan here, and Spring Green, so our little group here is a Sauk County group. We love to invite you to the conversation too from Merrimack, but we got really concrete, pulling together the buildings we know that belong to the UMC, the new ministry grants, and then art skills and connections to multiple communities of youth in the communities. And what those assets brought together around vision wise was we want to be the kinds of communities that are family for people who've been rejected by their families or communities. And so we are envisioning art, some sort of art collectives or art events where, well, whether it's an event or it's an ongoing thing, we know that there's the skills in this group that could be a place of belonging around art and teaching art. So come on over to Merrimack, maybe you want to be a part of it too.
That's incredible. Thank you. Thank you.
Do you want more? Or is this, you said one or two?
But I want one more. Selfishly, I want one more. Can we have one more, please?
So I'm in Trimble County, and a couple of years ago, I started, Deb Hexie, sorry. A group, Rural Unity Through Hope, so we're Trimble, Buffalo, Jackson County, and we were trying to meet the needs in our area. And we, a couple months ago, started a program. We get sweatshirts, and then if anyone has cancer, we have some sewers who will put the zippers on the side, etc. So when they go for IV treatments. And so we've been putting it in bulletins in our area, and we've given 21 out. But Sue here is a sewer. So I said, oh, you can sew for us. So it's just little things that, bring us together.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Just to let y'all know, I can't see you, but I can hear you, and I think that's all that matters. Thank you for engaging in this activity. Thank you for just participating today. And I really hope that the conversations and the activities that you all participated in creates a new vision and breadth around what's possible. And I truly hope that more is possible because of the conversations that we have started in this room together. There's two quick questions that I do want to address that Lisa Jones named. So how do you see the church needs to shift, around compassion work to changing systems? And can you explain the difference between the general issue of learning, grassroots organizing, and advocacy? So I want to say this, when I began my this call to this relationship between faith and justice, gosh, when I was 12, I felt this call around like, God is asking me really to wrestle with this question in the church around why are we as people of faith committed to this work of justice? How does our faith connect us to this ministry of justice? And I used to always be frustrated that the church would always begin with charity. But I think for a lot of folks, especially the early church, I think that's our entry point, right? I think that's something that we do very, very well. But I think that the other piece that Acts, the book of Acts, calls us to shift into is really to addressing the systems. And I think all over scripture, we can see the ways that the biblical story calls us to the prophetic witness of addressing the systems and empires that I would say are the cause and the obstacle that create systems of and conditions of injustice, right? Like, I think that the biblical witness teaches us that. And I think that when we can lean into that a little bit more in terms of like Bible study, and even in identifying folks within the congregation. So the deacon who said that you work with the ACLU, I think Lisa, I think there's another Brian who works with the Wisconsin Council of Churches, right? There are folks among you that are doing that next work of connecting the church to then our prophetic witness, right? And I think that we're able to move to those spaces by being in intentional relationships and conversation with folks who are already doing that. But that is a specific call of ours. And I think as faith leaders who are already doing the work, there is another invitation for us to begin being intentional about how we share that, how we train around that, around how we continue to be a witness to doing that in the church and the world. And I also think that's for us too, as church and society, we're the resource. I have an incredible group of colleagues, advocacy staff here, Reverend Camille Henderson Edwards, who leads our economic health and gender portfolio, Reverend Kendall McBroom, who leads our civil human rights portfolio, as well as Colleen Moore, who does our Peace with Justice portfolio. We are here to resource you to take that next step, to re-envision how charity moves towards justice in intentional and practical ways. And that's not a heavy lift as United Methodist. We have, again, that social holiness, the social witness, our social principles that connect the church to society. So I just want to name that. I think that charity is an entry point, but moving towards transforming conditions of injustice, I think that's a deeper call to discipleship as well. And then the last thing about the difference between issue learning, grassroots organizing, and advocacy. Earlier, when I talked about the work of church and society, right, that we state the church's position through 3 areas of educating, advocacy, and organizing. So we understand that people of faith come into the work of justice at very different levels, but we want folks to be educated in understanding how the problem begins in terms of the roots. We want people then to engage their members of Congress through advocacy and also local decision makers. And then we also want to build leaders from that, right? Because the work of creating change does not just start and stop at education. It does not just start and stop around advocacy and policymaking. It continues through organizing, right? We, and I'll say this is a beautiful kind of example. I think about Representative Justin Jones from Tennessee. Representative Justin Jones was an intern in our ethnic young adults here at Church and Society. He moved, he did a lot of incredible things. He was mentored, cared for, participated in advocacy in his local context, and became one of the youngest representatives in District 52 in Tennessee. And he serves today. And I just think about his story as an incredible example of how when we enter and also support the different levels of engagement of the church, whether that's education, advocacy, and organizing, we really can build up leaders that can shift and transform the world the way that God has called us to. And so the different areas of whether that is general issue learning, so learning about the issue, to being equipped to being an advocate, to then organizing in terms of building your leaders, building leaders. It's all important. It's not an either or. And I think as the church, all of us should be engaged at every level, and all of us should be building leaders, right? And so I think the organizing piece is really important for us to be able to be in intentional conversation with one another, to know our values, our interests and passions, and where that aligns in our work for justice. That's all that I have in the last 2 minutes. I will, there are some resources. I've already sent my slides to Lisa. So Lisa can send those out to you. If you want to be in further conversation to me, you can call me or text me, 202-488-5637. You can email me any questions that you have. This has been a joy. Thank you so much. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Laura.